So good, so good, so good.
Everything you want for summer is at Nordstrom Rack stores now and up to 60% off. Stock up and save on the brands you love like Vince, Sam Edelman, Frame, and Free People. Join the Nordy Club to unlock exclusive discounts, shop new arrivals first, and more. Plus, buy online and pick up at your favorite Rack store for free. Great brands, great prices. That's why you Rack.
I'm Jeremy Hobson. This is the follow-up from the middle, bringing more of your voices into the conversation on a new topic each week. And we are following up in this episode about mental health in the military and among veterans as the Iran war continues now into its third month. We recorded our latest show in front of an audience of veterans and others in Kenosha, Wisconsin last week and heard from many of you on our voicemail. And we're going to get to it right now with veteran, author, former Missouri Secretary of State Jason Kander, who co-hosts the Majority 54 podcast. Jason, it's great to have you here.
Good to be back with you.
Well, and in our conversation, we had a Vietnam vet who was in combat 50 plus years ago. We had an Iraq War veteran who was in combat 20 years ago. But for both of them, the memories of what happened are still front and center. I wonder about you, now 20 or so years after you were in Afghanistan, how front and center for you are your memories of combat?
Extremely. It's probably the most formative period of my life. And it's an odd thing, like just to hear you say that it was 20 years ago feels so strange to me because on the one hand, I just turned 45. So mathematically, it definitely was 20 years ago. And yet, oftentimes it feels like yesterday. So those sort of experiences are quite vivid.
You cited PTSD as a reason to drop out of the Kansas City mayor's race back in 2018, which now, sorry to keep dating things, was 8 years ago or so. How are you doing now when it comes to that 8 years after that decision?
I'm doing very well. So, for context for listeners, I had pivoted from running for president to running for mayor because I thought that's what was going to solve my mental health issues. It turns out, no, actually, I needed to do a little more work than that. So I pulled completely out of public life, went to the VA here in Kansas City, started going to weekly therapy. And about 7 months later, I entered what I refer to as the post-traumatic growth phase of my life. And I'm doing very well. I just spent 5 years leading the national expansion of a veterans nonprofit. I now am more of a part-time advisor to the organization. But I'm a pretty outstanding husband and father, have the podcast like you mentioned, and other things going professionally. But really, I just... I guess the way I think about it is my life is really bifurcated into the period when I was not well but didn't realize it, and then the period since then when I got help, and I'm very happy and I really enjoy my life.
When you talk about getting help, one of the things that we heard over and over again in our program the other day was how important it is for veterans to be able to talk to other veterans who understand what they have gone through, and that it's actually hard to find people that they can relate to who did not serve. Has that been your experience?
Yeah, I've tried to be useful in explaining this to people because, everybody knows somebody, or maybe it's the person listening to this, who says something like, my grandfather was in World War II and my grandfather was in Vietnam, but he never really liked to talk about it. And what I always say is, your grandfather didn't like to talk about it with you because you wouldn't understand. And most of us who have served, even if you'd never, deployed, have stories that when we're with other veterans, we share and we likely laugh about them. And we come to learn that if we share that same story with someone who didn't serve, they won't laugh, but what they will do is recoil a bit and noticeably change their impression of you. And it's just because if you've been a part of that world, you absorb those things differently. And you just sort of learn that there are stories that are sanitized that you can tell, and there are stories that are reserved for sharing with other people who have a common experience.
Well, and I want to ask in a few minutes about what that means for people who didn't serve and what they can do if they didn't serve, and what can they do to be helpful. But listen to this. One of the members of our audience, a veteran named Eduardo, who got emotional sharing his thoughts about what was important to him when it comes to supporting veterans and their mental health.
Getting the word out, to me, it's having the resources that you can share with all the veterans. Sharing my stories with them shows them that they're not alone. Mm-hmm. I think a lot of times they just need someone to talk to, someone who they can feel that they can put themselves in their shoes, in their boots, and that is the greatest connection. When I first came back, a Vietnam vet across the room saw me, identified me. He knew exactly what was wrong with me.
What do you think when you hear that, Jason Kander?
I've heard it many times, that sort of thing. And it definitely does sort of take knowing what you're seeing. I've been fortunate to play this role for a lot of other veterans. When I'm talking to a fellow vet and we're doing the whole two dogs at a stoplight noticing each other thing, hey, where'd you serve? Where'd you go? All that kind of stuff. What branch? What is your MOS? All that business. At some point I'll say, how are you sleeping? And it tends to take folks by surprise. And oftentimes it is the case that after several minutes, I am sort of, for lack of a better way of putting it, giving them my testimony and telling them why they should go ahead and go get help. And the reason that becomes necessary is because I can really only speak for the Army. I think the Marines are this way too. I suspect the Air Force and the Navy is to some extent, that when you go in, an immediate form of brainwashing begins. And I don't say this in a derogatory fashion, but just to explain what it is, the brainwashing is the message of what you're doing is no big deal. Somebody else has it worse. And that starts the moment you get off the bus at basic, and it continues in the culture until the moment you render or return your final salute and leave the military. And it's actually really important that be a part of the military, because in order to get folks to go out and do really dangerous and really frightening things, they kind of have to believe that it's no big deal. And by comparison to someone else, it must not be that big of a deal. The problem with that is that nobody switches that off when you leave the military, when you come home from a deployment. Nobody sits you down and says, okay, actually, that was a pretty big deal. That, like, for normal humans, that's not a thing that most people experience, and you should really look into getting some help. So as a result, a lot of veterans go through the rest of their lives believing that what they did was no big deal because that's what they were told. And that, more often than not, I have found, is what keeps a lot of veterans from going to get help. In my case, I was not one of the people, and I think these people are less and less common anyway, who believed that going to get help for post-traumatic stress was somehow a sign of weakness.
Right.
The culture has pretty well gotten the message across to men.
Even in the military.
Even in the military, I think for the most, we're really mostly past that period of, veterans shaming other veterans for getting mental health help. It's really extremely uncommon now. I think the bigger problem now is that we don't understand that getting help is actually very helpful. Because if you look at the portrayal of people with post-traumatic stress, certainly in film and television, but also, in the news more often than not, it is what I refer to as PTSD porn. It's a form of voyeurism, and it is almost always a depiction of somebody with post-traumatic stress who has not been treated and is in the throes of it and is in some sort of terrible spiral. What we don't see, and what I didn't know about before going into therapy, was that the majority of the people who do the work in therapy and do the homework and commit themselves to the process, the vast majority of them reach a post-traumatic growth phase of their life. You're never cured of PTSD because it's based on memories and experiences, but you can get to a point of post-traumatic growth where it no longer disrupts your life, and you can live your life and be fully functional. And we need to get the message out to people that that's a real thing, and that whatever you did in the military or whatever other trauma you might have, even if you're not a veteran, that you don't actually have to do anything to earn PTSD. You can just get it, and then you can treat it, and your life can be completely different than it is.
Listen to this voicemail we got. It sort of gets to your point about the person who said, oh, my grandfather in World War II never wanted to talk about it. Listen to this.
This is Christine Romeo from Asheville. In the late 60s, my brother quit college and was within 2 weeks drafted into the military, and he served in Vietnam. And his 80th birthday is coming up, and he never said one word about his experience until he was 65 years old. He just kept his mouth shut for 40 years. Then it just started flowing. I don't know why he did that, but it was very interesting, and I'm glad that he let it all out.
Have you come across people like that who actually did keep things bottled up for many, many years, even decades, and then all of a sudden let it out?
Yeah, but I would also throw out the possibility that her brother might have been talking about it with somebody.
With other people.
Probably people he served with or other people who served. You know, my grandfather didn't talk much about World War II until I came home from Afghanistan. And then we talked a lot because I think he realized I might understand now. And so it's really important to be able to talk about it. And there are plenty of folks who don't talk about it with anybody, and it's not good for you. And so what I would say is to people listening to this who want to reach out, like if you're a civilian, you never served, and you want to reach out to somebody and you feel like they do need somebody to talk to, my recommendation is to be genuinely curious and not to be there to fix anything for them and not to be there to try to make them feel better about anything. Is to just say, hey, we're close. I'm genuinely interested in you as a person, and this is a part of your experience that I don't know about. And if you can be comfortable with it, I can listen without judgment, and I'm really, really interested in it. And then just be really interested and ask questions, ask stupid questions, but try very hard not to physically recoil when they tell you things that
you might not want to hear.
Yeah, I mean, because look, your coworker who you like quite a lot and you find funny and charming and is great with kids, they might have done some things that are either things they're not proud of or the kind of things that happen in war or seen some things. And you need to make sure that you put yourself in the mindset where that's not going to change your opinion of them and that that's clear to them. And if you can do that, they might very well talk to you about it, and they might find that very useful.
A reminder to follow us on Spotify or wherever you get your podcasts if you aren't already. We'll be right back with Jason Kander.
Ready to soundtrack your summer? With Red Bull Summer All Day Play, you choose a playlist that fits your summer vibe the best. Are you a festival fanatic, a deep end DJ, a road dog, or a trail mixer? Just add a song to your chosen playlist and put your summer on track. Red Bull Summer All Day Play. Red Bull gives you wings. Visit redbull.com/brightsummer ahead to learn more. See you this summer.
Welcome back to the follow-up. I'm Jeremy Hobson. I'm joined by Jason Kander, an Afghan war vet, former Secretary of State of Missouri, now co-host of the Majority 54 podcast. Jason, you talked a little bit about the VA. That's a big part of this conversation. There are mixed feelings about it. There's been funding cuts over the years. What are they doing right in your mind, and where could they be improving things?
Well, in terms of what the VA does right, as somebody who has gotten quite a bit of service, not just mental health service at the VA, everybody that I've interacted with at the VA, everybody who works there, is really proud to do what they're doing. And any limitations that they run into are as aggravating to them as they are to the people they're serving. They're really interested in serving veterans. They've made it a calling. And I'm talking people from the call center all the way to the clinicians. And in terms of the limitations and the problems at the VA, I'm really careful every time I talk about this to to change people's perception of where these problems originate. Because the VA is, in a bipartisan way, everybody's favorite political target. You can get a long way as a politician by complaining about the VA and by trying to grill the VA and blaming the VA for things. But I spent the last 5 years working at a veterans nonprofit trying to serve veterans, including veterans who didn't qualify for VA benefits for a variety of reasons. And what I learned was that the vast majority of problems at the VA originate with Congress and not with the VA. And the reason for that is because members of Congress on both sides of the aisle, when they pass benefit programs and create new programs for the VA, for decades, what they've been doing is asking the wrong question. And that wrong question is, how do we make sure nobody gets access to this benefit who doesn't deserve it? And the reason that's the wrong question is because it assumes that there are veterans who do not deserve veterans benefits, but also because it means that all the people they have deemed deserving have to go through a labyrinthine bureaucratic system in order to access their services because so many obstacles have been set up to keep out the people who, quote unquote, don't deserve it. And so that's what the VA is constantly trying to surmount. And Congress, frankly, makes that harder and harder all the time. So what people should advocate for is for the sight aperture on VA services, the funnel that people use to access VA services, be broadened a great deal. Because a really large percentage, I'm talking 30 to 40% of people who serve this country in uniform, don't have access to the VA and aren't even considered veterans by the federal government. And it's for mostly the wrong reasons.
Well, and in fact, I think the statistic was something like 60% of people veterans who had died by suicide had not gotten any care for mental health by the VA in the last year of their life as well.
Yeah. Let me ground that down even further for you. A lot of people listening to this are familiar with the stat that on average 22 veterans take their lives in America every day. On average, of those 22, 16 of them are not connected to any sort of veteran-specific services of any kind at the time that happens. What that pretty clearly means is that Congress has made it too difficult to access veteran services. And the barrier for entry needs to be a lot lower and easier to clear because it will save lives.
By the way, it is a cause of death that is way higher than it should be among veterans, but also suicide is the number one cause of death for active duty military. Is that the same issue at the end of the day, or are they two different things?
I believe it is the same issue at the end of the day. The active duty military needs to make it a lot easier to access mental health services. And while I said a few minutes ago that culturally we've reached a point where people don't feel so much anymore that it's weak to get these services, one thing that we have not fixed, and in fact I think this current administration is going in very much the wrong direction, is we have not fixed the way it affects your career. So if you are still active duty and let's say you imagined making this a career, there's a real cultural disincentive from going to get mental health services while you are active duty because people are under the impression, and with this administration they might be right, unfortunately, that it will harm or slow down your career in the military.
Interesting.
And by the way, that's insane, no pun intended, because would we rather have soldiers who have undiagnosed mental health issues, or would we rather have the ones that are treated? And I think whether you're talking about active duty or veterans or anybody else, I would rather deal with people who have dealt with their stuff than people who are putting off dealing with their stuff.
There are many outside groups. We had a guest on from one of them. It's called Dry Hooch, and it allows people to get together, tell their stories without any, alcohol or drugs being involved. But veterans, there's also a member of our audience who talked about the power of translating veteran experiences into theater as a way to process complicated feelings. Listen to what this caller thought about that.
My name is AK. I don't have a military experience, but I am a mental health, behavioral health professional. I think one aspect perhaps of this is that going to a hospital, being in a very clinical, sort of sterilized environment is just not a normal, comfortable environment to have to speak to the really hard things that we've been dealing with. But giving them an outlet like art, theater, to tell their own stories gives them, agency and ownership over their stories versus coming into a clinical setting.
Have you done anything like that, Jason, over the years?
Yeah, I mean, it's analogous, I believe. In 2022, I published a book called Invisible Storm, A Soldier's Memoir of Politics and PTSD. I didn't do that for therapeutic reasons, per se. I did it because I thought it would be helpful to people. But what it did for me is it really allowed me to... The process of putting my story down on paper, including my story of going through therapy and reaching post-traumatic growth, really helped me organize my thoughts about who I am and how I got to be this person. And I think that whether you have post-traumatic stress, whether you're a veteran, whoever you are, I think really having to sit down and think about who you are and how you became who you are is generally a pretty useful exercise. And I actually tell everybody, whether you're famous or not, write a memoir, because your kids and grandkids might find it useful to learn about who you were so that they can understand who they are.
Yeah. I was in Los Angeles during the fires and had to evacuate very quickly. The fire did not end up taking our house or damaging it, but it was a very fast, kind of scary moment. I went and saw my neighbors who were, in their 80s and wanted to make sure that they got out okay. But then I'm like, do I have a responsibility to go to every house on the street and make sure everybody's okay? No, I need to get myself, my dog out of here. And after that, I talked to my therapist and he said, I want you to write a letter to the fire. And that was like his, which is, get it down, get all your thoughts down. I think it was, in my case, therapeutic. What do you think, by the way, about drugs, MDMA, psilocybin, ketamine being used for PTSD?
Look, let me preface this by saying I'm not a clinician. I'm just a guy who went to therapy and wrote a book about it. But my general philosophy about this is that therapy is the best thing you can do, and there are things that you can do paired with professional evidence-based therapy that may be very useful. I have not done those things. However, that is, in my case, because cognitive processing therapy and prolonged exposure therapy worked very well for me. And if at some point in my life I reach a point where I'm like, you know what, I need to go back and do that again and it's not really working, then I will try the next thing and the next thing. Mm-hmm. So I encourage people to keep trying things until they reach post-traumatic growth. But what I like to say is that it does make sense to start with the most proven things first and then see what might pair well with those things.
I want to get to one more caller. Listen to this.
My name is Robert. I am calling from Burlington, Vermont, and I wonder if some of this that they need to deal with is the issue of guilt, because it's not just veterans in active combat that are getting shot at and mortared and bombed at, but there are civilians, the most innocent of people, including children, that have suffered at the hands of the military from any side. Even if your role was more antiseptic in that you would press a button, you know at the other end of that, somebody's going to die, and they might be innocent people that do. And I wonder if that affects people's psyche. I think that we need to deal with guilt, and we need to deal with forgiveness.
I was thinking about this, Jason, just in the context of what happened at the very beginning of the war in Iran, which was an accidental bombing of a girls' school and many, many, many dead children. That's not something that the people who pressed the button to send that missile are ever going to forget.
Yeah, it's called moral injury, and it's a real thing. The caller is exactly right. It is a real thing, and it has to be dealt with. And when you have an administration that seems dead set on pretending those things never happened, it makes it a lot harder for the people who suffered moral injury, who are under their command, to actually deal with those things.
What does it mean to you that we're in another war in the Middle East right now?
Are you asking me as a veteran with PTSD, or are you asking me as like an American who's politically engaged?
Both. Is there a different answer for each one?
I guess not. It's just stupid. It's just the dumbest thing. Every bit of this is PhD levels of stupid. And it makes me mad because the same people who kept telling us that they were going to be better because they learned all these lessons from Iraq and wanted to blame a bunch of people who fought those wars. And don't get me wrong, I was opposed to the war in Iraq. I thought it was really stupid. But to do it again is extra stupid. And you look at the complete lack of a plan, complete lack of strategic objectives, no ability to agree on what they are, and inability of any kind to admit what it would actually take to win a war with Iran. Pretending that you can win a war with Iran through just the air and from the sea is just a lie. I mean, everybody understands that if you're going to go to war with a place like Iran and you're going to achieve the objectives that you claimed you wanted to achieve at the beginning of the war, like regime change, like actual regime change, or, seizing the nuclear arsenal, in the history of warfare, that has been done by putting boots on the ground. And I say that as a former boot on the ground. And I want to be clear, I am not advocating for that. That would be another level of stupid. Right. But to pretend that you can achieve these objectives without that is foolish.
Do you think that this war, I mean, you were part of the longest war in American history, Afghanistan. Do you think that this war is still going to be going on post-Trump?
Is this the time when I can make a prediction? I know that's the thing.
If you want this to be your prediction, you can. But
yes.
That's the next thing is the prediction. But go ahead, yeah.
I believe that the war in Iran is not really going to end. I think what's going to happen is that Trump is going to get to a point where he realizes that he has no options for quote unquote winning the war. So he will do what he does in most situations where he realizes he can't win. He will declare victory, but he will declare victory in the midst of a ceasefire and not in any sort of actual truce or treaty or peace agreement to end the war, because in order to do that, he would have to concede things, because the only way to end this war truly with Iran at this point is to concede that you probably should not have started it in the first place. And so what's going to happen is he's going to pretend that Iran made some great concession, and he's going to say, oh, we're at a ceasefire. And that means that the next president is going to inherit a situation much more inflammatory than the one we have at the DMZ in Korea, but very similar, where we will technically remain in a state of war against Iran in an indefinite ceasefire, and therefore no ability to actually affect what Iran does, no ability to have direct diplomatic relations with Iran, and he'll be handing a real soup sandwich to the next president as a result.
Okay, I'm going to push my luck here and just ask you for one more prediction, because I want to know what you think is going to happen in the midterms, given all that's going on with redistricting and everything else.
I think that what's going to happen in the midterms is the Democrats are going to take the House, but not by as much as they would have had it not been for all the cheating. And I think there's an outside chance that the Democrats take the Senate. And then once that happens, I think you're going to get I would not say by any stretch a timid Trump administration in the second half of this term, but I think that they're not going to be able to move as quickly because they're going to be summoned to Congress a great deal more, and there's going to be more scrutiny. But I do think that Democrats are going to take the House, and I think that there's honestly very little that they can do to stop it because they've made so many bad decisions.
That is the former Secretary of State of Missouri, Jason Kander, author and veteran of the war in Afghanistan, also the president of the National Expansion at the Veterans Community Project, and his podcast is Majority 54. Jason, thank you so much.
Thanks for having me.
And thanks for listening to The Follow-Up. It was produced by Harrison Patino. Our next episode is coming this week. We are going to be asking if you are ready for autonomous vehicles, whether or not they are already in your community. Don't miss that. I'm Jeremy Hobson. Talk to you soon.
Did you know if your windows are bare, indoor temperatures can go up 20 degrees? Get ahead of summer with custom window treatments like solar roller shades from Blinds.com and save up to 45% off during the Memorial Day Early Access Sale. Whether you want to DIY it or have a pro handle everything, we've got you. Free samples, real design experts, and zero pressure. Just help when you need it. Shop up to 45% off site-wide right now during the Early Access Memorial Day Sale at Blinds.com. Rules and restrictions apply.